Good evening, everyone. Oh, there we go. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending our first budget meeting of the 2025 year. We're going to get started with audit questions. Whoever you'd like to speak, Dr. Beekers.
Sure. So what you should see up on the screen is the agenda, and I believe Edmund is here with us this evening. And at our last meeting, the audit was provided to the board the night of the meeting, but we wanted to make sure that board members had an opportunity to review the audit and address any questions at this meeting so that action could be taken at the board meeting to accept the actual audit. So Edmund, I don't know if you have anything else that you wanted to share, but please feel free to do so. And then board members, we will engage with questions.
Thank you, Dr. Beekers. Yes, so I don't have anything extra to share tonight. I believe the reports you got pretty much would mirror the final version we have. I did send an updated draft to David and Sean, which pretty much just included the response to the findings that were provided. So that's pretty much the only difference. But other than that,
Great. Can that updated one be provided in the chat? Is that okay? And so
Edmund, if you could do that, or Sean, if you have that, you can include it in the chat. That would be fine.
Thanks so much. So first, because we have a lot of people here, do any school board directors have any questions about the audit? Okay, seeing none. If any participants, and we have 94, I have anything to share, if you could just raise your hand and I will happily call on you. Or if for some reason you can't find that, feel free to just say something. Take yourself off of mute.
And Deirdre, can you confirm, can people take themselves off of mute, or do you have to control, or are you controlling that tonight?
Hey, Doc, it's me. People can take themselves off of mute.
Okay, thank you, Justin.
Okay, and there is a Q&A, right? Q&A
it is, yes. No, let me see.
I don't see it.
No, it is not.
Okay, great. All right, all right, Sean, Mr. Ryan, thanks for putting in there. Hearing no questions, we can move on to the next topic, Dr. Beekers. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. Thank you, Ms. Hoff. As most board members know, given our financial situation, the board has contracted with PFM, and we're working with Ian Tyson, who has done some work around assumptions, model summary, and then some baseline projections. And I'm going to turn it over to Ian, who I believe will guide this presentation and the slides. Ian, if you need help, I am right here. The document is up on the screen, but I want to make sure that you're okay with handling it. And if you cannot, I will assist.
All right, thank you, Dr. Beekers. Good evening, everyone. I believe my colleague Brianna Unebu is going to share her screen with the slides this evening.
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing.
And there we go. I can see it on my end.
Okay, I don't see it on my end.
Nor do I.
Sorry, I'll try again.
Okay. There we go.
I think we could start off on the next slide, Bree. Good evening, everyone. I'm here with my team today to present the first phase of our work. I'm here tonight. My name is Ian Tyson. I'm a director of public financial management. I'm joined by my colleagues Brianna Unebu and Soraya Lucent. And we work with K-12 school districts all around the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania on these issues. We review financial audits, prior year historical budget data, current year budget data, and we analyze that to look at trends, and we project that out over a number of years. So due to some of the cost pressures and budget pressures that the district is facing based on its prior year audit and some of the preliminary analysis done on the current year budget, we were hired to prepare an analysis of those pressures and project out those costs over a number of years so we can quantify what that gap may look like over time and then help you build a plan of action to resolve it. So here tonight, we're presenting the first phase of our work, which is the baseline projection. This is a status quo projection of our analysis. It starts off with your current year budget with some adjustments and then shows how those revenues and expenditures would change over time. As Dr. Becoach shared at the beginning of this presentation, we have the slides and then the backup analysis as well. So the slides here have the narrative summary, the model summary, that's an Excel spreadsheet with all of the detail, and then the assumptions is a narrative that accompanies it that kind of explains some of the details of our assumptions for the different revenue and expenditure line items. So tonight, the information is intended to be informational. It's to assist you in planning as you head into the budget development process over the next couple of months. And over time, these numbers will shift as the district's business office digs into developing the budget for 2025-26, and as we get a better handle on how these results are playing out in the current year. So tonight, we're presenting that information with your current year budget with some adjustments. And again, that number will change as you get closer to that final budget in a couple of months. And then later, we'll come back with the second phase of our engagement where we'll take a look at what initiatives you might need to consider to close any projected gaps in future years. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Bree.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to take a little bit of time to talk through the district's historical financial trends and also discuss a couple of financial drivers on both the revenue and expenditure side for both this historical picture and that may impact the projections. So here I have a chart of the district's audited financial statements from the 2019-20 school year to the 2023-24 school year. Here you'll see the net operating result is in yellow, these yellow boxes here, and then the unassigned ending fund balance is the blue boxes above. You'll see in the table that the district has had 3 out of 5 years with negative operating results beginning in 2020-21. And then in 23-24, the district saw that it exhausted its ending fund balance, resulting in negative $4.7 million ending fund balance for 23-24. So over the next couple slides, I'll talk through a couple of financial trends to show how the district sort of had this financial situation come about, and also a couple of areas to highlight when looking at the future projections. So I'll start with a couple of the larger revenue drivers. First is real estate taxes. Historically, this has been a large portion of the district's revenue, resulting in around 40 to 50% of total revenue annually. This is an area that is generally flat unless there's significant increases in property development or unless there's increases in the millage rate. This is an area that the district has control over, but it would be generally flat without those changes. Another large driver is major state subsidies. In the past 2 years, the district has seen larger increases in state subsidies, but this area is voted on by the state legislature every single year and is largely out of the control of the district. I'm going to talk more in depth about state subsidies in the next slide. Another area or large driver historically has been ESSER funding. Over those historical years I just showed you, the district received approximately $25.4 million in ESSER funding. That was pandemic relief funding for the district. However, these ESSER funds are not shown in the 24-25 budget, and they're not shown in any of the projected years as well. Finally, another driver is a large portion of cash flow borrowing that the district intends to use in the 24-25 school year. This is to cover prior bills and manage a revenue shortfall in the 24-25 year. However, they will not be carried into future years. They're one-time funds and not a sustainable source of revenue for the district. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on state funding for this most recent year. The Commonwealth enacted its 24-25 budget with a couple of extra funding sources. So you'll see in this table on the right that in addition to regular basic and special education funding increases, the district also saw increases or new funding in hold harmless, adequacy supplement, and tax equity supplement. All of that resulting in an increase of $6.3 million in the 24-25 year. Two things to note with the supplements. The tax equity supplement, although it was included in the 24-25 budget, the statutory language mandates that the funds need to be spent in the following fiscal year. So that would be 25-26. Additionally, these supplements have some restrictions according to the school code, with only certain allowable uses for these funds. Finally, just reiterating that future increases in these areas are voted on annually by the legislature. So the district may not see an additional $6.3 million next year. At this time, we don't know what the amount will be for state subsidy. So here are a couple of expenditure drivers. We have 6 total. The first 3 are here. And I'll talk through sort of the historical trends from 2018-19 to 2024-25, and also areas to watch for the future projections. So starting with salaries, historically, this line item has increased by around $1.3 million annually. Something to consider for the future is upcoming contract negotiations that may increase or slow down this growth in future years. For benefits, the district saw increases of approximately $600,000 over those historical years. Some future considerations are that insurance typically grows faster than other expenditure line items, particularly for prescription coverage. So this could continue to grow faster in future years. Transportation saw increases in those historical years by around $300,000 annually. And for future considerations, additional students requiring transportation services would lead to larger increases in transportation costs in future years.
May I interject something real quick?
Sure.
Can you go back a slide?
Yes.
I just want to make sure that everyone knows that the 1.3 million annually on teacher salaries is about 3%. Salaries are our #1 expense, as everyone can imagine, in a service business. And so I don't, like, 1.3 looks like a huge number, but in reality, it's a very small increase given how many staff we have. And if anyone wants to correct me, they can.
No, that's completely right. Thank you for highlighting that. In further slides, Soraya will talk through the pie chart of expenditures, and salaries and benefits are the largest part of the district's expenditures. So on the expenditure side, continuing with a couple of the drivers, is special education. Historically, this line item has increased by around $500,000 annually. Some future considerations are that the district has let us know that it's seen increases in students requiring special education services. So that would cause this line item to increase potentially. Charter school tuition is another large driver. It increased by $1.2 million annually in that historical period. Future considerations are that this area may increase or decrease depending on the district's total spending and also enrollment levels. So those are 2 areas to watch for that line item. Finally, debt service grew by around $500,000 annually over that historical period. Future considerations would be that if the district wanted to do any capital projects, it may need to borrow in future years, which would increase the amount it pays for debt service annually. So those are a couple of the drivers that help explain both the historical years and also will help color some of the projected years that my colleague Soraya will discuss.
Thanks, Bree. Good evening, everyone. My name is Soraya Lusant. I'm happy to be here with you all tonight. So as Bree and Ian have mentioned earlier throughout this presentation, the first phase of our work here is talking through the district's baseline multi-year financial projections. Before getting into the various assumptions we've made throughout the baseline projections, we wanted to highlight the importance of multi-year financial planning. Firstly, we just wanted to share that it's a best practice for high-performing districts, and ideally it can be used to review current and historical trends, as my colleague Bree just did in the previous slides, to identify revenue gaps in revenues and expenditures. Lastly, we wanted to highlight that this is a status quo projection, as Ian mentioned earlier. So this means that there is no corrective action being taken on the baseline projections, but the projections start to highlight sources of financial stress for the district to help with decision-making in future years, as, for example, upcoming budget discussions. Thank you. This slide highlights the district's current revised 24-25 budget and reviews the major budget categories for revenues and expenditures in the pie chart. As you can see on the charts below, general revenues were about $127 million this past year and about $130 million for general expenditures. On the revenue side, you'll see that real estate taxes are a major driver for the district's budget. This is also seen historically. Total local sources, so that's real estate taxes as well as a bunch of other sources, account for about 44% of revenues for the district, while state sources provide about 53%. So local sources and state sources are the larger categories for the district's budget. On the expenditure side, as Bree mentioned before, salaries and benefits are the larger category. Combined, they're about a little under 60% of the district's total spending. You'll see there's some other categories in the budget that drive it. As you can see, charter tuition is around 10%, professional services around 14%, and so on. In the next few slides, we'll talk through some of the assumptions we made in the baseline projections. First, we break them out through the revenues, and then we'll talk a little bit about expenditures. On this slide right here, we'll talk a little bit about local and state sources specifically. As shared before, the real estate taxes are the largest source of revenue for the district, but in the baseline projections, we're not assuming any tax increases in the projected years. So that's starting 25-26 through 29-30. We're holding the district's budgeted revenues for real estate taxes flat based off the 24-25 budget. And we're also not assuming any increases to the district's collection rate. So that's about 92% for current collections and 99.5% for delinquent collections. We're holding all other local sources flat based off 24-25 budgeted amounts. On the state sources side, a large driver for that, as Bree talked about earlier, is basic and special education funding. For the 24-25 enacted budget, we're using the allocation that was provided this year by the state. For future years, we're assuming historical increases to both BEF and SEF. For BEF, that's about a $225 million annual increase being added to the funding formula. This is about $46.8 million for SEF in the future years. We're also assuming that the district's hold harmless amount is rolled into the base allocation and no future hold harmless increases are assumed. The next few sources are Ready to Learn. So we're continuing on state and federal sources in this slide. A state source that's a large bucket for the district this past year is the Ready to Learn block grant, as well as the supplemental funding that was added for the district. Combined adequacy and tax equity supplement added about $4.4 million to the district's budget this year. With the Ready to Learn Foundation amount, it was a total of $5.5 million. We're not assuming any future increases to the adequacy supplements. As Bree mentioned before, this is something that would have to be voted on annually in order to know what those estimates would be. We're growing transportation subsidies at half of inflation, which is 1.2% in our model. Reimbursements are tied to changes in salaries and published reimbursement rates by the Commonwealth. And we're assuming all other state sources are held flat and no Plan Con funding is assumed in the projections. As Bree mentioned earlier, there is no ESSER funds being included in the 24-25 budget as the allocations have been ended as of September of this last year. And we're assuming all current federal funding for the district is held flat in the projected years. An area that we adjusted in our model is the food service transfer fund line. There is $0 budgeted for this in 24-25, but we know it's an area that the district is invested in. Starting 25-26, this is increased to $50,000 and increased by inflation annually after, which is about 2.4% in our model. The next few slides focus on expenditures. This one specifically around salaries and benefits. As shared previously, the district has historically increased salaries by about 3% annually. Our model specifically breaks this percentage out differently depending on the group categories. As you'll see on the chart below, for Act 93 and teachers, this is about a 3% increase annually. This is 2% for school safety officers, and all other salaried employees are grown at 2.5% in our projections. Employee benefits includes health insurance, dental insurance, and some other areas such as Social Security and employment, et cetera. Health insurance is grown at about 5% based off district trends. Dental insurance and prescription coverage is grown by 4.5 and 11.4% respectively based off the Siegel Group 24-25 Health Plan Cost Trend Survey. And other benefits are grown based off inflationary rates, and PSERS and Social Security are changed with salaries as well. Personal care assistants were adjusted in the 24-25 budget as shared previously, and also I believe in the November meeting that you all had with each other, there are some categories that saw large increases in this past school year. So the 24-25 budget was adjusted for personal care assistants to include $2.3 million worth of additional services. This estimate plus other budgeted personal care assistance amounts are grown by 3% in the projected years. The next few areas cover other operating costs of the district's expenditure budget. You'll see the district budgeted a little under $500,000 in budget cuts. This is removed after 24-25. Budgetary reserve, which is around $1.2 million, is held flat in the projected years. Charter school enrollment as of 24-25 was around 864 students. Our projections are assuming an increase of about 25 students per year based off the district's pre-pandemic trends, and future tuition rates are calculated using the 363 rates. Again, transportation is an area that was also adjusted in 24-25. This was increased, the budgeted amount was increased by $1 million to account for increased service needs, and future costs are grown by 3%. Debt service is based on the district's current debt service schedule. Other expenditures, such as non-personnel related expenditures, are grown by our inflationary rate. The district's transfers are decreased by about 50% in 25-26 and held flat after. This slide reviews the district's current baseline financial projections. We want to reiterate that this is a status quo projection, meaning no corrective action is taken to fill the district's budget shortfalls. As you'll see on the graph below, the yellow bar represents the district's net operating results annually, and the blue bar represents the district's unassigned fund balance. You'll see in the 24-25 budget year, the district is ending the year in about a $3 million positive operating result. This is related to the district's cash flow borrowing this past year, which we'll talk about a little bit more in the next slide. You'll see starting 25-26, the district's negative operating results begin, and this grows annually by about 5.7, an average of 5.7 million. As well as the negative operating results are growing, so is the district's ending fund balance. As I previously mentioned, the district's ending fund balance is $3 million in 24-25. This is related to assumptions around the district's cash flow borrowing. The district borrowed cash flow money to cover prior year and current year expenditures. We're assuming that the district's remaining balance will be around $3 million at the end of this fiscal year. We're assuming that the district's ending starting fund balance will be that remaining balance, the $3 million, due to varying estimates for the district's fund balance. A final number in future projections and in future presentations to the board will be included once the audit process continues. As we mentioned before, the growing shortfall for the district's baseline projections is about an average of $5.7 million from 25-26 through 29-30. There's a few reasons why this estimate is growing over time, largely due to limited revenue generation in the historical years. And the one-time cash flow is not enough to outpace the growth in expenditures. As you'll see, the district's expenditures are typically tied to cycles, i.e. contracts that we've talked about previously, some external market factors, and additional service needs. These factors can be difficult to control, which puts pressure on the district's budget. And the little table you see over on the side, we highlight some key areas in the year-over-year change. That first table looks at state funding, the cash flow borrowing, as well as the food service fund transfers, and shows that the total change in revenues from 24-25 to 25-26 is about $8 million, a decrease of $8 million going into the next year. And you'll see that on the expenditures and salaries and benefits, the increase is around $3.4 million. Budget cuts and other expenditures add an additional $4 million to the district's budget. So it's about half of the loss of revenues to the district in 25-26. Bree highlighted some key drivers for the district in the previous slides, i.e. real estate taxes, state subsidies. We talked a little bit about salaries and benefits and costs that are both in and outside of the district's control. Here we wanted to reemphasize some of the drivers that can both improve or impair districts' budgets. So on the improved side, you'll see increasing real estate taxes, you'll see limited growth in salaries and benefits, slower charter enrollment, etc. On the weakened side, you'll see that slower local revenue generation impairs the district's budget, or increases in collective bargaining agreements, greater inflationary rates than that are assumed in our projections, faster growth in charter enrollment, which would lead to increased charter tuition costs, and additional unplanned expenses can lead to impairments in the district's budget. In the next few slides, we'll turn to Ian, who will highlight some of the key summaries for the district and talk about next steps.
Thank you, Sarai. So as we show in the baseline analysis, the district has a structural deficit, which means that the recurring revenues are less than the recurring expenditures over time. So although the district had received a large increase in state subsidies in the 2024-05 school year, these are not enough to sustainably fund the district over the long term. That growth in costs is exceeding the growth in revenues over time. As 2 points of reference, we have this table here showing how the district could potentially close the shortfall in 2025-06 with revenue options only. So this looks at two extremes on the revenue side. What if the budget shortfall was balanced with tax increases only? And what if it was balanced with state aid increases only? So these are not recommendations for a particular course of action. We're not here to recommend that you consider a 17.9% tax increase for next year. This is just so when you see those numbers on the chart in your head, you can refer back to these figures for, okay, on the local side, what would the effort have to be to close that shortfall? If the state provided an increase, what amount would close that shortfall? Those are the two reference points that we have here on this slide. Finally, again, this baseline projection was not intended to solve all the district's problems. Our purpose here tonight is just to diagnose that issue that we're seeing in the district's budget and to quantify what that shortfall looks like over time. Given the size of the negative results, we're going to have to put together a list of options that closes that gap and will exceed that number so that you have choices to make in making that making those budget adjustments. And in the next phase of our work, we're going to collaborate closely with Dr. B. Coates and the business office team to provide context for our analysis, provide input on those initiatives. And then later in the year, over the next several months, we'll be back to you with presentations to outline those initiatives and how those impact the budget as you move forward in the budget process for next year. And with that, that brings us to the end of the presentation.
Thank you very much, Ian. Ms. Hoff, if I could, I just wanted to share something, if that's okay.
Of course, Dr. Bicos.
So I know that we have a lot of school staff, excuse me, on this Zoom, and I'm glad that they're here. We did extend an invitation to them, and I know that some people are wondering, what is the impact to me? And I wanted to explain why we invited you tonight, and why I invited you tonight specifically so that we can understand where we're starting from and the foundation, so that you have all of the background information and knowledge as to some of the decisions that we're going to have to make over the next few months. I do want to say that we have not made a decision as it relates to how we will address the shortfall of about $9.2 million, which was listed on slide 16, and that was a status quo budget. One of the things we know is that we cannot operate a school district with a status quo budget and a $9.2 million deficit. We have a legal responsibility to have a balanced budget approved by June the 30th. And so that's what we will be working toward, and working toward addressing the $9.2 million shortfall. So I just want to try to help individuals understand where we are. And again, I just want to reiterate, no decisions have been made on what cuts we may identify for the 25-26 school year. So that's what I wanted to add. Ms. Hoffman, I'm going to turn it back over to you. I know that we have several board members, elected officials, as well as our attorney from the Law Center, Public Interest Law Center, who assisted us in our court case, present tonight. Thank you, Ms.
Thank
Hoffman.
you. Thank you very much, Dr. B. Coates. School board directors, do you have any questions for PFM? Citizens, do you have any questions for PFM? Mr. Callahan?
Yeah, that last number that on the very last slide, those two choices that are not recommendation but simply an analysis, the 17% and the state funding, is that a combination or is that an either or selection?
That's an either or selection. So if you did one, that would close the $9.2 million gap. And if you
Okay.
did the other, that would close the full gap.
Thank you for the clarification.
We should also state that we're not legally able to raise taxes that high.
That
Nor
is
is it
correct, Ms.
recommendation.
Hoffman. And I
Um,
believe that the board has already approved that they would not go above the ceiling. I think that was approved in December.
Correct. Any other school board directors? Any citizens? Mr. MacArthur?
I had a question about the charter school tuition funding. It said, I saw that it was 9.7% of the 24-25 budget. And I think it was stated on another slide that it increases or it has increased at an average of 1.2 million over the past several years. And there was also, in one of the assumptions, there was a projection that that equates to about 25 students per year. If you divide 1.2 million by 25, I believe you end up getting something like $48,000, which I would think is more than a per pupil tuition payment for the charter school. So I just don't understand exactly. Can you say more about how 25 additional students per year equates to 1.2 million?
Sure, I'll start off and I'll let Soraya and Bree jump in too. Part of the story that's going on in the background is the per student tuition rate is based on the district's budget. And one of the factors that gets included in that is the ESSER funds. So those federal funds that the district had received over the past 3 or 4 years were deductions that were lowering the amount that would be paid per student for charter school tuition. So one of the things that happened in the more recent year budget is that as those funds are rolling off and being spent down and being removed from the budget, then that amount is increasing because you don't have those deductions if the costs are not going away along with the revenues. That's one factor to consider there. And then Bree or Soraya, I don't know if there's anything else that you want to
Yeah,
add.
I wanted to highlight that the 1.2 million is related to the district's historical trends. It doesn't account for the growth that we're assuming starting 25-26. So the 1.2 million was the average annual increase between 2018-19 through this current budget year. And in the future years, so starting 25-26 through 29-30, we're assuming a 25 student increase. So just wanted to clarify those differences.
Mr. MacArthur, if you have any further questions, just get it to Dr. B. Coates and he'll get PFM to answer.
Sounds
Thank-
great.
And I'm not sure that the 25 students is an accurate increase, but we should also look into that also, Dr. Gaycoats, please. Any other citizens with questions? Representative Curry, sorry about that. You can speak.
Hi, everybody.
Good evening.
I actually had the same question that the last gentleman, but mine's a little different. I don't see any projection of students coming back into the district who come back in from private schools or charter schools. Do you have that information and how much that would cost the district? Because we know in both of the districts, in my district, which is your district and Upper Darby, you have an influx of students who go in and out. So I know you have the charter school students, a projection for that, but what about students who are actually coming back into your district? What is the projection of what that cost would be?
So if I can ask a question to clarify that. So for the private school students, are you talking about students who may enroll in a private school, then enroll in the William Penn schools? Are we considering that in the projections? Is that part of the question there?
Yeah, both private and charter, because we know that that happens quite often. Like students come back in and then you have to project for more funds based around those students. And you know, we've been fighting the charter school thing for a long time. And
Mhm.
one of the things, when I sat as the school board director in Upper Darby, we talked about the fact that if kids leave and go to a charter school, the charter school gets to keep the money and the kids come back in. That money doesn't come back with the kid.
Mhm.
So is that in your projection? Because I would really like to know from Dr. B. Coates how many students that is. You have the projection of 25 students from the charter leaving to go to charter. But what's it look like coming back in? And Jen, I know that we talked about this a lot in PSBA. So I think that needs to be a part of the look too, because you know, if a child goes out half year, they come back in because they get dismissed for behavior or anything else. We know our public schools then get those students back, or if a parent has to come back into their public school because they can no longer do private school, what does that look like? Would that
Right.
also take away?
So I would like to ask a clarifying question, Rep. Curry. The private school, when they come back, there's no financial equation other than a seat is filled. Are you talking about approved private school placements regarding special ed?
Those, and then your projection of what it just costs to have students in your building, period. Right?
Yeah.
So you have numbers, but you know, that projection of students that come back in, they also cost you money, no? They cost
Uh, yeah, of course they do.
Yeah.
I'll let Dr. B. Coates and Mr. Tyson handle this.
So
Yeah. Oh,
just
sorry, go ahead,
to,
Dr. Because.
no, I was just going to add, so our enrollment projection methodology does take into account the movement of students in and out. I can provide you with a more specific number, but the methodology does take that into account as it relates to the number that we would have. But you are correct with the statements that you've made, Representative Carey. But I can follow up with you with the exact numbers.
I think the only reason why I bring it up is because of the deficit that we're seeing here. You know, looking at every detail, and that's what came into my mind from my past experience on the school board. I didn't see that mentioned, and that absolutely that has an impact on the district when those things happen. So I just want to make sure that's covered as well.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you. Thank you. Those are great points. I mean, for the most part, we are using historical trend analysis for that. So as long as that's captured in what we're reviewing there, then I think that should account for some of the points that you're mentioning about the private school students who might come with new transportation costs, or on the charter school student side, we're looking at the average over time. So, you know, that would just be trying to take account for those students who might be in those schools for a couple of months, or, you know, shifting among the different cyber charter schools and going in and out. So we don't have an exact estimate for, these students are here for X number of months, coming with X costs, and then they're here with those. It's a 25 student average across the year.
Thanks very much, Rep. Curry.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
but those points are very well taken.
Thank-
Any other citizens with questions? Elected officials with questions? I do want to note, that there are 115 participants. Many are electeds, many staff, and we're super appreciative of you all being here this evening. We know you could be anywhere you wanted to be, and that you choose to learn about this budget really means a lot to us. Next up, Dr. B. Coates.
Yes, just as a wrap up of this particular item, we will continue to keep all of these individuals informed about our developments as we go throughout the next couple of months. I do believe it's going to be very important for all of us to understand the process that we are taking as we move forward. But again, thank you all. And I'm going to move us to our last item, Ms. Hoff. Every so often, I think it's every 4 years, we have to provide tax collector rates. And this was last done, I believe, the year in which I actually joined the district, which was in 2020. And so right now, the tax collector's compensation rate is $1.75 per bill. And so you'll see the expense that we have for the tax collectors, and it's based upon the number of bills. And so you'll see the number of bills by borough. And so the $1.75 per bill has us at an expense of $25,000. We did look into, just given where we are financially, we did look into what would happen if we decrease the compensation rate to $1.25. It would be a total of $18,000, savings of $7,351, or we reduced it to $1 per bill, and we would have a total expense of $14,000, which is a savings of $11,000. So we're in a position to make a recommendation to the board for action, but I did want the board to see the 3 scenarios that we developed in an effort to be fair in all of our expenses as we begin to look at expenses for 25-26 going forward. Keep in mind that we also utilize a company who provides assistance to us in the collection of tax bills. So that's what we have, and this would be a motion on this coming month's agenda based upon which one of the rates the board so desires to move forward with.
Dr. B. Coates, can we also get surrounding districts and how much they're paying?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. School board directors, do you have any questions? Citizens, do you have any questions? Elected officials, do you have any questions? All right. Seeing none, have a great evening, right? We're done, right?
Yes, ma'am. Thank
All
you.
right. Have a good evening.
Thank you.